My first realization of what electric power might be was when I was about 5 years old, and out of the island homestead we had no electricity, so lighting was candles or kerosene lamps. And my father came home with a small 1,000-watt generator, and suddenly we had bright lights just like downtown. Since then, I've always been interested, fascinated by electricity.
I spent a couple of years trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. Worked in Madagascar for a while. When we arrived, it was a dark village. It would have been way too expensive for them to build electrical infrastructure, but what they could afford was for everybody to buy a little solar panel, a little battery, and a light bulb. Everybody at night all of a sudden had the ability to continue talking, studying if you're a kid, getting to be there and see this change happen. And on top of that, for the change to have also preserved the ecology and environment around them, it was just something really beautiful, and that got me started on the renewable energy path.
Renewable energy is one of America's fastest growing sectors. Wind and solar output is up 58% in the last 3 years, and with the Inflation Reduction Act offering hundreds of billions of dollars in clean energy investment, there's a whole lot of potential for exponential growth. And it couldn't have come at a better time, with everything from extreme weather to supply chain freeze, putting the squeeze on our local grids. America is ready for a more affordable, more sustainable way to power, well, just about everything.
When we talk about sustainable, we're really talking about the big business picture, the business of living on Earth, the business of having our utilities. There are other energies that are available to us, but what can be developed and what's the best possible economic course that we take in development?
Beneficial electrification is using electricity to displace oil so that the money stays in your local economy, isn't exported with each empty oil barge, and that nobody loses from the proposition.
Chances are you're seeing beneficial electrification every day, with 8.5 million electric vehicles on American roads projected to grow to 26.4 million by 2030, and major automakers pledging to go all electric by 2035. And while EVs first became popular for their sleek bells and whistles, they're not just fun to drive, they make sense. Dollars and cents, saved at the pump, saved in our carbon emissions. They're a powerful way to clean up the air and get us where we need to be now and way down the road.
In a perfect world, my thought would be everything should be electric, right? We shouldn't need internal combustion engines anymore.
Mobility is a huge consumer of energy. It's also a producer of emissions. And our challenge was to electrify it.
How do we provide the charging capabilities for EV owners to be able to operate and drive their vehicles with the same level of flexibility and peace of mind that they've done for decades with internal combustion engines?
The main barriers to adoption, at least for consumers, is the range anxiety. They don't feel comfortable making a very long trip. I think the key is that we bring the charge to the vehicle.
Ubiquitous charging. Our goal is to actually send power from a roadway to the vehicle, all through electromagnetic fields.
You don't need to stop and charge your battery. You're going to drive down the road and the road's going to do it for you.
It may sound like science fiction, but researchers at Aspire are already well into a pilot program with industry partners like Cummins, known for their big diesel engines, now looking to go electric, and the Indiana Department of Transportation testing wireless EV charging, paving the way to an electrified future. Meanwhile, in Alaska, the Juneau Carbon Offset Fund and the Sustainable Southeast Partnership are helping people save money and stay warm with locally generated renewable energy.
The cost of heating homes in Alaska is considerable. The biggest part of everybody's personal budget is space heating, but we have choices now that don't contribute to the carbon load. Nowadays, we're using air source heat pumps, which use electricity, but a fraction of the electricity because they're not creating the heat. They are merely harvesting the heat that already exists in the ambient air, and it's become revolutionary, matching the demand that we're placing on our systems with electric vehicles and air source heat pumps, developing the supply to meet that demand. That is one of the biggest challenges we face.
That's why building a sustainable energy system means developing renewable resources to make sure we do have enough energy to support all of this growth. The easy part about renewables, they're all around us.
Offshore wind is the one major resource the state of Maine has. We have about 156 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity within 50 miles of the coast. And just to give you a sense of how big that is, if we harness just 3% of that, we can heat every home and drive every car.
Instead of spending billions of dollars on importing electricity and fuel into the state, all that money will stay in the state and we'll actually be exporting electricity.
Talk about an American dream. But first, we've got to build the infrastructure to make it happen. And that's just what they're doing at the University of Maine. And so far, they've come up with some far-out ideas.
People thought essentially we're insane. You're going to float wind turbines and put them beyond the horizon? And the answer is yes. By floating the turbine, you can fabricate it and tow it out to sea beyond the horizon and moor it to the seabed. What that does, it allows you to pick areas that have lesser impact on the environment, instead of being fixed to only do it within a few miles of the coast. And the other impact that it reduces is the visual impact.
The goal of this offshore wind program is to start small with single turbines, but eventually build an offshore wind industry in the state that will provide enough renewable energy to power the state and create thousands of jobs in the process.
Renewable energy not only generates massive power, it generates massive job growth. Experts estimate that by 2030, up to 18 million new jobs will be created in the energy transition. But that kind of growth will have its own challenges. As they say, with great power comes great responsibility.
There is a loss if we try and outpace our capability too quickly.
Knee-jerk is, yes, put up wind turbines. We need solar. Build more, build more, build more. As you get to high penetration renewables, you overbuild so that you have enough, but those overbuilt assets, they're curtailed with conventional thinking.
The traditional way of utilizing the energy is essentially generating to the demand, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're using the total capacity of our generation plants. The paradigm shift is to move forward and utilize that total capacity.
Our hydro capacity varies very much from a given year to given year, or depending upon what the snowpack is. Right now, excess load is just a pretty picture of water spilling over the spillway. Our job is to capture all of the renewable resources that we can and deliver it to users most cost effectively. How do we do as much as we can with the resources that we've already invested in?
That's always been the catch with renewable energy. Its limitations aren't in how much power it can produce, but when it can produce it. Fuel sources like wood, coal, and oil work because you can burn them when you need them. And so the big question is not how do we produce more energy, but how do we store it?
There's a lot of different types of energy storage. There's not a lot of energy storage that's flexible. Lithium-ion, for example, only has the ability to hold electricity for a week or two. It's degrading as long as it's charged.
I got a call from a friend. He said, hey, I got this great idea. We should take inactive oil and gas wells and convert them into energy storage devices. 2.15 million inactive wells in the United States, and several 100,000 wells can be converted into energy storage devices. So these wells, on average in the United States, are a mile deep, about yay big, and lined with steel casing all the way down. So we have a lot of drop. This is an important characteristic of energy storage. If you've got a lot of mass and a lot of height, then you can store a lot of energy. When that weight's at the top of the well, it's got a bunch of potential energy. And when it comes time for us to actually push power onto the grid, let it descend down the well, but we control it with a wire rope. So now the weight's descending and it's pulling this winch, and this winch is made up of a motor generator. So as the weight descends, it's making power, we're pushing power to the grid, and then when the weight gets to the bottom of the well, we pull power from the grid and reel it up. It's like a big battery.
With mechanical energy storage like this, you can hold it indefinitely. You're just putting a break in place. Could be a second, could be a year, makes no difference. And so adding that to this geographical flexibility we have, where we would be a distributed system, creates a situation where not only can you hold it as long as you want, but you also have the ability to discharge completely sequentially. So that flexibility to do any amount of time and any amount of duration is really valuable to renewable energy.
Using abandoned oil wells to store renewable energy is quite the innovation. But what if excess power from renewables like hydro could also create alternative fuels to power cars, homes, shipping vessels, fuels that you could generate and store from Alaska to Nebraska?
There are some areas where electrified vehicles may not be the answer, that we may still be using fuel that's made from hydrogen that's, a liquid fuel.
The shipping industries and other industries are now really focusing on ammonia as the next fuel of choice.
And how do you manufacture ammonia? You electrolyze water with electricity. That produces hydrogen and medical grade oxygen. The air around us is 80% nitrogen. Put the two together with the right catalyst and process, you get ammonia.
If you're using green energy to power the electrolyzer, you can make what's called green hydrogen, carbon neutral hydrogen. And Cummins is starting to deploy these electrolyzers in places where there's hydroelectric.
Think about if we can take excess electrons, generate a decarbonized fuel that we can store for months or even years. What does that do to a really isolated community? What if you took that decarbonized fuel, put it in a fuel cell that would produce both heat and electricity, and you put it next to a greenhouse? If you have heat and you have electricity for power, you can light it. So now that rural community could have food, it could have electricity, and it could have heat. Now you're going somewhere and you're rethinking the paradigm of how we look at energy.
Sustainability to us means the opportunity to take something that was, by all views, trash and or an environmental hazard, and then turn it into something that's actually net good for the environment.
When you can make money in the process of that, I feel like that's when an idea really has a chance to make a difference.
I would hope that in the future, my children will live in a state where we have a robust electrical grid, where most of the energy we use on a day-to-day basis is all electrified. We're generating consistent, clean energy from wind and other sources to power that grid. We have an abundance of electric vehicles that are storing that energy, and gas isn't something that they even consider.
I think that future's closer than we think it is.